The Pennsylvania Game Commission outlines their plan for CWD and PA, and we talk antler restrictions. I'm Brian McLaughlin, here with my dad, Allan McLaughlin, and this is Heirs Podcast. So recently, the Pennsylvania Game Commission outlined their CWD Control Plan, and this is essentially what they're going to do. I think only in the DMAP areas, although it's essentially unclear. 1, engage stakeholders and provide accurate and current information regarding CWD. 2, increase deer tags available. 3, expand hunting season lengths. 4, remove antler point restrictions. And 5, implement mandatory sampling within CD control units. Actually, there's a 6th one. Targeted removal of deer if management objectives are not met through hunter harvest. So essentially what we're getting is through these, and we watched the 21-minute video online that the PAGC put out, and this lady outlines everything about CWD and what they're going to do. And essentially from what we gathered, they're going to essentially do a deer genocide in those areas. It's essentially, well, what they argue is the only way to get rid of the infections altogether. Is that pretty much what you got out of it?
Yeah, it is. And I see how they're trying to control the spread of the disease, but they still do not know what actually causes the disease. And they probably ought to be concentrating more on what causes this than stopping the spread of it. I mean, they could stop the spread of it, but if they can find out what causes it and stop the deer from getting it, it might be a little better way to go about things.
Yeah, so you can have as many genocides in areas as you want, but if it keeps coming back, it's not exactly going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, and they're targeting certain areas, not the whole state, from what it looks like on there. States with the CWD is in certain areas in the state higher than others, and they want to do like New York has done. And basically, they went in and just killed as many deer as possible to cut down the spread.
Yeah, and they said that New York and Minnesota had success doing this, and essentially, it doesn't really look like there's any other way that any other state has had success doing it. But the reason that they're taking out the antler restrictions, obviously, is that they need to make sure that they kill off all the deer in an area. And if we let the deer get older as they do in the rest of the state, then obviously those deer will be able to spread it, because apparently the male deer have 3 times more likely to have CWD than the rest of it. Anyway, so do you think it'll actually work, or do you think it'll kind of just be a whole bunch of people senselessly just shooting as many deer as possible?
Well, I think it'll actually work, because if you kill all the deer, there aren't any deer left to catch it. So basically, they're just going to genocide the deer, kill them all off in that area, and hope it doesn't spread. But like I said, it would be more beneficial, I believe, to actually find out what causes it and try to prevent the deer from getting it. I hear a lot of things about chemicals that farmers use in their corn, and the deer are actually picking it up through the chemicals, fertilizers, and hybrid corn. Nobody can confirm or deny that, but I think that if they would check into it and find out what actually causes it, and hopefully, if it was a man-made thing, we could eliminate the whole disease through how we treat our crops.
Right, yeah. Now it's looking like on the map here, it's in Pennsylvania and West Virginia largely, and goes all the way down a little bit North Carolina, but the large part of it actually started all the way in the Midwest, out towards even the West, and it's in Wisconsin pretty heavy also. So those states have to deal with it too. Now, I also wanted to say the symptoms of CWD are drastic weight loss, which is the wasting part, stumbling, lack of coordination, listlessness, drooling, excessive thirst or urination, drooping ears, and lack of fear of people. So if you see any deer exhibiting any of these symptoms, go ahead and make sure you call the PAGC and let's take care of it. So, because we're in Western Pennsylvania, we don't really have an issue with it over here, but we really don't want it to come over and affect us. And also it affects deer, elk, and moose. So I think the PAGC really wants to stop it. especially so it doesn't go ahead and get to the elk. Another reason that I kind of think that the PAGC is moving forward with this, and they actually are unclear about whether they want to go and put it to the rest of the states, is, and I think they actually mentioned it, is the fact that we have a lot less hunters in the woods, the PA woods nowadays. Since 1982, there's been a steady decline of hunters, and also there's been a steady decline since they implemented the 2-week rifle doe season. There's been a drastic decrease in all around deer, and that's if you talk to people, that's a lot of reason why they've stopped hunting. So what do you think about the antler restrictions and the 2-week doe season? I know you had some words with Gary Alt, and had a pretty big opinion on it when it finally started, and they were talking about it. So why don't you go ahead and let me know what you think about that.
I didn't drastically oppose the antler restrictions. I kind of didn't like the way that they were going about it, but the biggest issue and the whole thing was shooting off all the does. You know, if you want to reap a harvest, you don't shoot all the does and the reproduction. So what basically happened is when you can see in I think it was 1982.
Yeah, that was the peak.
That was the peak where they killed 200,000 bucks antler deer that year, and for the next couple years, after they started the antler restrictions, the buck kill was gradually decreasing, but whenever it gets down to 2007, 5 years later, the buck harvest was half. Now, why would it be half? My only explanation that I understand, that I think happened, and this is just my opinion, is they increased the doe license, and they killed off a lot of the button bucks and didn't have the bucks to be able to mature, because they killed so many button bucks and does off that they weren't there. So they've actually kicked themselves in the butt, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get the antler restriction. I mean, I understand that completely, but I really didn't get why they wanted to have more of a 1-to-2 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-1 buck-doe ratio like the other states that have particularly big deer. But over in Pennsylvania, I really think it was terrible just before we even had the good genes, just to start wiping out all of those, all the deer population, essentially. Like, you know, they massacred them. Even I remember all the shots and stuff like that. And even from when it started in 2002, I mean, I think I was like, what, 8 then? Have you noticed a significant increase or decrease in the amount of like nice bucks we've been seeing around here and people who've been harvesting, or is it about average?
I'd say the nice bucks, the size of the bucks in the mountain areas have gotten bigger, because you don't get the hunters up there anymore. When people were going up there and not seeing the deer because they had killed them, they quit hunting up there, and some of them quit hunting altogether. So if you don't have people up there to actually harvest the deer, they're going to live longer, and yeah, they're going to get bigger racks. I don't attribute that to the antler restriction as much as just the lack of hunters in those areas. Around my area, I've noticed that most of the 8-point, year-and-a-half-old bucks got targeted, and I don't know whether it has anything to do with the genes or not, but I've never saw spikes in 4 points in my area. Most of the year-and-a-half-old bucks were 6s and 8s, and then we have some nice racks around here. But now that they've targeted the year-and-a-half-old 8-point and his genes, they're getting a lot of inferior buck genes in the does, and yeah, they still mature, they still get big, but it'll take them 2 or 3 years longer to reach those points, I think, just because of the lack of genes. And we've pretty much killed them off. Okay, so you're saying because the antler restrictions were put in, it kind of worked in some areas, but not because of the antler restrictions. It's just because everyone kind of quit hunting. And the one
one criticism that I really have of the antler restriction policy is like we said, there's a lot of smaller bucks around here, and there's no calling system to where if a buck is obviously has terrible genes and is never going to get really big, and that's not the gene that you want in the gene pool, there's no way except for youth hunters and military members for it to be killed off. So if you know there's a deer around there with bad genes, you have to pretty much go find kids to shoot them for you, or else it's essentially not going to work. Now, I've noticed we have a lot of like the deer numbers of coming back in the mountains. And do you think we're going to pick up some more hunters, or do you think it's going to stay the same? You think they're gone forever?
I don't know. A lot of young kids these days, because their parents don't hunt, they aren't introduced to hunting, and a lot of the parents have quit hunting because of lack of deer. I don't know if it'll ever come back, but that's why we're here. That's why we're Heirs of the Outdoors. We're trying to promote hunting. We're trying to keep the youth involved and get them out of the house. We're hoping that the numbers will increase. This would help our Pennsylvania Game Commission. This would help support our Game Commission. I believe they try their best and they do what they feel is best. And sometimes the things they do, sometimes the things they do, they think are good, but are not as good as they had hoped, and it hinders things. And I think, in 1982 had 1.3 million hunters entering the woods the first day of buck season, and in 2016 we had 550,000, which is over half a reduction in hunting license being sold. So hopefully it'll start increasing. People start seeing more deer. They'll start taking up more interest. They'll start taking their children out into the woods, and they'll pick up on it just like their fathers and grandfathers. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, and essentially, if we do have more deer, like we're getting back now, the more people are going to be in the woods, and that's why we really want to get new people into into, like you said, into hunting, because it's something that is a kind of a dying sport, unfortunately, and we hate to see that happen because we just enjoy it so much. So the more hunting license we get, the more money that the PAGC gets, and hopefully they can go ahead and use that money in their efforts to stop the CWD, so we can continue to have successful deer harvests in the future. So like I said, guys, just go ahead and check out the 21-minute video that the PAGC put out there on CWD. You can be critical of it, you can support it. Just I think if you're a hunter, it's really important that you go ahead and watch that video. We're going to go ahead and put that link in the description, so go ahead and check that out. And that's it for us today. This has been the third podcast we've done, and we look forward to a lot more. So thank you, and everyone have a good week.